You're listening to the most captivating podcast in iTunes. That's right, the Elite Man Podcast, where we turn average men into elite men every day. We interview the very best experts from the lifestyle, health, fitness, social, and even entrepreneurial worlds. And with their help, we give you some of the best advice on the planet. Subscribe now if you haven't already and enjoy the show. And oh yeah, if you really enjoy it, leave us a review. On today's episode number 244, entitled Confessions of a Mob Boss, How One of the Richest and Most Notorious Gangsters in History Survived Prison, Criminal Rivals, and Leaving the Mafia, I chat with Michael Franzese. Michael Franzese is a former mob boss of the Colombo crime family in New York who had his most affluent time generated between $5 to $10 million per week from his legal and illegal businesses. In today's episode, Michael talks about his many years spent in the Colombo crime family, what he did to get in, how he shot his way to the very top, and how he made so much more money than everyone else. He covers his sit-downs with bosses like John Gotti, his gas tax fraud which netted him multi-millions every single week, his careful strategy to avoid being caught by the police, and the truths and lies about the mob in America. Michael also talks about leaving the life, why he changed his life for the better the day he quit, and what he's been doing for the past few years. If you're wondering what the mafia is really like, what the gangsters from the movie Goodfellas were actually like, what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa and JFK, and so many other inside stories about the Italian mafia, check this episode out now. You are going to love it. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, there's two reasons why. A, you're probably living under a rock and you haven't listened to any other Elite Man podcasts in the past. Or B, you're completely insane and you've just ignored all the messages that I've told you to check them out in the past. Either way, make sure you check it out right now. This is your last chance if you have not checked it out yet. And if it's been a while since you've checked some of our videos out, make sure you go back on and check them out today. I'm telling you, you are going to love some of our new videos. Go to elitemanmagazine.com/YouTube and check them out today. Make sure you like some of the videos if you like them, comment on some of the videos to leave your feedback, and subscribe to our channel if you have not subscribed yet. And also, if you want to be super helpful and go one step further as an elite man, share some of our videos on your social media with some of your friends. I really do appreciate it personally, and I know my team does as well. We're trying to grow this as much as possible, so spreading that message with some of your friends who can benefit from watching these videos is one of the best things you can do for them and also for us. Again, go to elitemanmagazine.com/YouTube and check our channel out. You are going to love it. All right, guys, we're live. It's Justin Stenstrom from elitemanmagazine.com, and my guest today is Michael Franzese from michaelfranzese.com. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, this is a bit of a different episode than we've done in the past. I don't think we've ever done anything real similar to this, but I mentioned to you a moment ago, I'm a big fan of yours. I've heard a few different interviews that you run and a bunch of speeches that you give now. You're a public speaker, keynote speaker now, and have changed your life around dramatically in the past few years, especially. But you actually were a boss in the mob, or the mafia, as it's known, and probably, what was it, the 80s or 90s?
Yeah, I started in the early 70s and right through the mid-90s, yes.
Okay, cool. So we'll actually just pick it up from there. How did you get your start into being in the mafia? And I know your father was involved. Actually, I know a lot more, but I want the kind of audience to know. How did you get into the mafia itself?
Well, you know, when you get into that life, you just can't go up to somebody that part of that life and say, I'd like to join. Somebody has to propose you, has to vouch for you, say that, you know, you have what it takes to be a member of that life. In my case, it was my father. My father was a pretty prominent figure. He was at one time the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York La Cosa Nostra families. And, you know, originally I wasn't destined for this life. I was actually a college kid. I was going to be a doctor, but my dad got in some real trouble, and he eventually drew a 50-year prison sentence, and he was convicted in federal court of masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. My life kind of turned around at that point. I was 17, 18 years old when my dad got convicted, eventually went to prison on that. Joe Colombo kind of, you know, took me under his wing. Obviously, we knew him well, and we knew my dad well, and you know, things just changed. My mentality changed, and I wanted to help my dad get out of prison, and he thought the best way to do that was for me to become a member of his life.
All right. So you guys were part of the Colombo family?
Yes.
And he was the underboss. So he was the guy right under Joe Colombo?
Correct, yes.
For how many years was he the underboss? Was it just a short amount of time, or was it for like many years?
Well, it was a short amount of time initially because he got cut down and went to prison, but it was during the early 60s.
Okay.
And then actually, my dad is 102 years old now. And
wow, he's still alive. Oh, shit.
Still alive. And a couple of years back, he was appointed underboss again. But that's changed now also. Now he's pretty well retired.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Actually, the last, I think, interview I heard was something that your brother was on drugs or something. He helped him get like convicted at like age 96 or 97. So he actually went to prison and then he just came out again.
Yeah, my dad did a total of 40 years on this whole 50-year sentence. And then another conviction that he got combined with that. But yeah, unfortunately, my brother had a drug problem for most of his life. And at some point he got in trouble, cooperated with the government, and actually cooperated against my father. Testified against him back in I think it was 2010, and sent my father back to prison on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sad.
He's out now. Yeah, very sad. Your father's out now, though?
Yeah, he was released in 2017. He was 100 years old at the time of his release. He was the oldest federal inmate in the system. And right now is the oldest living made man in America, quite possibly the world. I don't think anybody's involved in that life at that age.
That's pretty cool. What is his name, by the way? I don't know if I've ever got that.
His real name is John, but everybody knows him as Sonny. Sonny's his name.
Sonny, yeah. I remember hearing that now. Is he living like with you now out in California?
No, he's, at 102, he has some ailments. He's in a wheelchair. He's got phlebitis in his leg. So he's right now in a VA hospital in New York. And believe it or not, he's still on parole. He's the oldest living parolee in America. So he's still got to watch himself at the age of 102. But he gets off parole in next June, I believe.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Good for him, though. 102, still plugging away.
Still plugging away.
Yeah. So when you get into it at an early age, your father, as far as I remember, he was in prison at the time. He talks to probably Joe Colombo or someone else up there and just basically says, like, Michael, I'm not going to tell you all kinds of stuff to do. Just talk to this guy and then he's going to set you up, and you take it from there. What were your first thoughts when you entered into this life? Did you want to do it for like your own selfish reasons, or was there some other kind of real motive?
No, honestly, Justin, I had no preconceived desire to be part of that life. I mean, I was an athlete in school. I was going to be a doctor. I was a pre-med student when my dad drew this sentence. So it wasn't one of my aspirations. If you asked me at that point in time what I wanted to be, I wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees. I was an athlete, and Mickey Mantle was my guy. But, I loved my dad, idolized him at that time. And I believe he was convicted of a crime that he was innocent of. And I'll take that to my grave. I believe that until this day. My father wasn't a bank robber. He wasn't guilty of that crime. We proved that in many different ways, but could never get the conviction overturned. So that motivated me to want to help him get out of prison. Otherwise, he went in when he was 50. You would figure 50 years on top of that, it was a death sentence. He would never come out alive. So, I had strong motivation to help him out. And he thought that was the best way to do it, and he knew I had it in me, to be part of that life. So it was really his decision to present me. And it was my decision to accept and go into it, basically to help my dad.
Yeah. So when you get into it, initially you're just like an associate because you're not a made guy right away, even though your father is like an underboss and super high and respected up there. You're not automatically just like granted into that life. There's like a series of steps you got to take, right?
Oh yeah, no, you're not, it's not automatic. You still have to prove yourself. When you get proposed, you become a recruit, meaning that you got to prove yourself over a period of time and do whatever you're told to do to prove yourself worthy. And then when that's determined by the hierarchy and they say, okay, this guy has proved himself, we trust him, we believe in him, then you become, or you get, formally inducted into the life. So I was never an associate. I was a recruit. And then I got inducted into the life and became a made member.
Okay. How many years did it take for you to prove yourself and to actually, and what kinds of things did you have to do to prove yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it's just about, almost 2 years that I was a recruit. I was 21 years old when my dad proposed me, something like 21, almost 22. And, you got to do anything and everything you're told to do to prove yourself worthy. It could have been something very menial. Yeah. There's a lot of discipline in that life, a lot of authority. a lot of alleged respect. You had a meeting at 8:00. If you weren't there at 7:30, you were late. You had to learn how to follow orders unconditionally. That's number one. And, look, Justin, I always try to be as honest as I can without being, silly about it. But, there's a lot of violence in that life. And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. And obviously it falls upon you. And it's a way that you have to prove yourself. And, I was no different than anybody else. You don't come in just because your dad is part of that life. And that's true of myself or anybody else. You got to prove yourself worthy.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of things like you can talk about and then some things that you can't talk about as far as, criminal activity and just things that, have done in the past that maybe you don't want to mention. So if it's, I'm totally cool with you not talking about whatever you don't feel comfortable talking about. But what are some of the criminal activity? What are some of the crimes that the mob, maybe you guys or even other mafia people generally do? Like for people who have no idea, they haven't watched a ton of mafia movies like me and just followed this kind of stuff for years and fascinated by it. How does the mafia actually really make most of its money in some of the things that they do?
Well, there's so many different ways. Let me dispel one, fallacy that's out there, at least during my time. We weren't big drug dealers. As a matter of fact, we weren't allowed to be involved in drugs. In our family, we dealt drugs. We were told straight out, you die. You're not allowed to do it.
Wow.
So we weren't major drug traffickers in America. As far as activities, look, we could have gotten into anything and everything that we thought was lucrative. Gambling, just about everybody is involved in that in some way. We love, a lot of guys love to gamble and we love to be in the business of gambling. So, I had a number of bookmakers that worked for me. We had a numbers game, racket going, I would call it. We were involved heavily with the unions. We controlled the unions, and through the unions, both legally and illegally, we used them as a tool to make money. I had a lot of bank connections back then, and we did different things with banks and insurance companies. So, you could be into almost anything and everything. A deal comes your way, you figure out if you want to be involved, and you go to it. In the early days, in America, extortion was big. A lot of guys would take money off of shop owners and things like that. And to a degree, we did that through the unions, through our union contacts. But again, we were very diverse. I'm going to be honest. It could have been in any business that you might not even know. I mean, we controlled the sanitation business. We were big in, Hunts Point markets back then. We had just so much stuff going on, Justin. I mean, I can go on for the next hour telling you that.
Yeah. I want to dive into in a moment the biggest moneymaker for you and probably for your family, the crime family at the time, which was the whole gasoline taxing. I want to dive into that in a moment. But like how much, if you had to give a percentage wise, how much of the money that you guys took in was actually legitimate compared to criminal? Was it mostly criminal stuff and there was just kind of like some legitimacy there? Or was it a lot of it was actually legitimate and people would never know?
Well, you have to go back to the various guys in that life, the made guys and what they were into. For instance, I'll use myself as an example. I had two automobile dealerships, Chevrolet and a Mazda dealership. I had a leasing company. I had a couple of restaurants that I owned. I owned a production and distribution company out in California where we would produce and distribute films. And all of them were money-making operations, okay? And I did very well with them. On the other hand, when you get into the gas tax scheme, I created a scheme to defraud the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. And that was by far the biggest moneymaker that I had because it was the biggest moneymaker we all had at that time. So, but again, I was one guy that was into business on both ends. I was into legitimate and illegal business. A lot of guys were not, they were mostly on the street trying to earn a living, doing some gambling or doing some shakedowns or, a lot of different things. So, I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. So everybody was into something illegal, everybody. It's hard to say who was making more money illegally or legally. It's kind of hard to say that.
Yeah. But you apparently landed on it wasn't Forbes, but it was another type of list like that where you landed on it probably like mid 80s or something. And you were the highest grossing mafia guy in the country or in the world. And I think you were maybe like top 15 or top 10 all time, which was kind of cool in one sense, but on the other sense, it put you on the